Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Wrist Cheese Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Brodinky. With me, as always, is my homie Schmidt in your home for the horological hot takes, taboo topics, and often unpopular watch opinions. Schmitty, what's shaking, baby?
Not a whole lot, my friend. Just glad to be recording another episode with you back at the home office doing our thing. And I think we're going to have a pretty good topic tonight. So all things good. How about yourself?
I'm hanging in. Work's been busy, but I'm staying afloat, trying to just keep up with the kids, the personal life, work, the whole work-life balance thing.
Tell me about
It's
it.
always
Yeah.
it's the mental gymnastics. I think
Yeah,
everybody
for
kind of
sure.
does.
For sure.
But I'm hitting a little bit of the summer swoon, which is nice because everybody starts to go away, so my schedule lightens just a tad, which is
And
refreshing.
we're almost on that downhill slope where things start to fire off for just a little bit longer for you and then coasting into the next year.
Yeah, I don't want to
Easy
harsh
breezy.
everybody's. I don't want to harsh everybody's gig on the summer vibes and everything. But once the weather starts to creep back down into the 70s and it's pumpkin spice everything, that's my time of year. Because A, I'm not sweating to death, and
Yeah.
B, the kids are back in school. There's not so many people lurking around, which is basically who my customer base is right now, which is why I'm so busy. But
Yeah.
when everybody's got something to do, the hustle and bustle, everybody starts hitting that Q4 mode where they got to start making their sales. Everybody's back at work. No more summer Fridays.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep. Yep.
can't wait. I know everybody else can wait. I cannot.
I would say this, at least for me, that's my travel slowdown period as well. Coasting here and then but right away, bam, things start picking back up and it's back on the road. So uh, I very much am also looking forward to that.
Yeah. Before we get into main topic, a couple little releases I wanted to mention. Our buddy Mr. Jones, who made a big splash on the pod, and then after that has caught a little bit of fire. In case nobody noticed, Mr. Jones has dropped a new watch. We
Yes, they
had
did.
mentioned the perfectly useless afternoon. We've now transitioned to the perfectly useless evening.
Yep. I love it. I
So it's a
mean,
darker motif,
yeah,
right? I thought at first glance that it might have been a lady in the tube. I think it's questionable. I think it's up for debate, which I guess is nice. Ladies need to watch too. It's not just all about the dudes sitting in the inner tube. So good looks there. But yeah, another fun little watch from them and a little variety.
he's got a martini glass on the back, which is just my style as well. And also kind of a little plug, shout out to our boys who cover all the liquor and watches from our other two podcast friends. So that's fantastic. But it's a cool watch. I love it. I think it's I don't know, maybe I need to add it to my collection. We've been talking about it enough, and the whole watch industry has been talking about it enough. It feels like it's finally time.
Yeah, another somewhat small brand that I think we like, we've mentioned before, Studio Underdog just dropped another flavor, right? It seems like that's all their watches are some sort of a flavor. This one is the strawberry. It's a light red, so not quite as Bordeaux as these other reds, but it's a little bit faded, a little muted. I kind of like it. Sort
It's
of their
nice.
their signature chronograph style.
Yeah, I mean it's great. And this is what they I think they call it what the strawberries and cream is the
Something like
is the
that.
new colorway. Um Very cool. It is a pink dial. Um maybe Studio Underdog can hook up with us to do our release this year. But very cool watch. As always, they knock it out of the park. Everything that they get just is sold out almost instantly. So they know exactly who their market is. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it extremely well. So, gotta love it. I love to see it. Shout out to them. They're doing big things.
Yeah, last little item of business before we get into the topic for today is this is a little bit of tea. I don't really know where I stand on it. Somebody sent this to me, and then it got confirmed by a post recently. So Zenith says that the Chronomaster Sport is a wait list watch for them. They keep a list. They can't meet demand, and I guess if it has all the overflow from the Daytona demand, I could understand it. Right, the Daytona is a very hot watch. Everybody said they look very similar when it dropped. I could see that. Now, they have also mentioned that the Defy Skyline, which was one of their more recent Defy models, with a 9 o'clock small seconds subdial. They've mentioned that is now a waitlist watch.
No way.
I cannot
Seriously?
Imagine that has sold like hotcakes. I have not seen anybody who owns one. I've seen some wrist shots, but it's people who generally either work at jewelers or have a jeweler connection. I can't say I've ever seen one on a wild wrist, even on the gram. Zenith Defy Skyline, a weightless watch? You buying that?
I no, I don't buy it at all. Not at all. And I've heard about the waitlist rumors for a little bit of time. Of course, nothing has been confirmed. My contacts that are in the industry have kind of told me some things about it, but we've never really talked about it on the podcast yet. But I've heard from a lot of different retailers that are still out there that Zenith just can't deliver product. So maybe that's why they've moved
Interesting.
to kind of the waitlist motif. That maybe it's just there's not enough product to go around all the retailers that now they're taking things on order or special request only as a way to buy time in order to deliver that product. So maybe that's what it is. But I mean, I can understand the Chronomaster Sport because I think that that's an extremely desirable watch for a lot of people. But a Zenith Defy Skyline with a 9 o'clock second subdial, I don't know if I buy that.
My first inclination when I heard this was, and Adam Sandler made a movie that went along right with this, is the guy who wears a wedding band to try to attract women.
Yes. Yes.
Right, like the one where he tries to pick up Brooklyn Decker and he pretends like
Yes.
he's
Yeah. Yeah.
married.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right, the kid at college who pretends he has a girlfriend so he seems like he's more marketable.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, hell, the guy who has a job just in order to get another job, right? It's like it's all about being more marketable, and I maybe this is a way to tell the industry that hey, Zenith is in demand at an all time high now. There's a premium to wait, but here's the caveat to that. You're not really seeing that from other brands that are similarly priced in that category.
Right.
I don't know what the long term effects of that are going to be for a young brand like Zenith. But let's be honest, the vast majority of the watch industry has only recently started really caring about Zenith in the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 years. Okay. They've done some really nice home runs. They've had some very great collabs. They're becoming more marketable and desirable. But this is a brand new emerging brand for emerging clientele. If you start throwing all these crazy lists and crazy wait lists and all this kind of stuff at them now, I don't know if you're going to start alienating your consumer base and all of a sudden those people are going to stop buying your products.
Well, certain brands that we know of can get away with that. Others cannot.
Yeah, exactly. Rolex can get away with it because they've been conditioned and they're so desirable that it makes sense. I just don't know if that's going to be a hindrance for Zenith moving forward. I mean, because to me, I don't want to have to wait for a damn Zenith. That's just me. There's other brands that I'll buy that I can get today instead of that.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yep, I agree.
Into main topic here. This is one that I don't know if I've heard it on a watch podcast before, but a lot of people do it. I've heard it on a lot of sports talk, or whether it be Shaq and Charles or whoever. People talk about their Mount Rushmore, and I always like the Mount Rushmore analogy because it gives you limitations to work in, and it puts you in a spot where you have to pick four. And for the people who aren't in the U.S., we do have some non-U.S. listeners. Mount Rushmore is a landmark in the U.S. that might have been acquired kind of questionably, but anyway, it's a landmark in the U.S. that is basically a mountain that they've chiseled out some of our founding fathers' faces in. So it's supposed to be people you're proud of in that sense with regard to our country. So in the case of talking about a Mount Rushmore, if you let's say you're a fan of basketball, a lot of times people say, who's your Mount Rushmore of the NBA? People will say, well, Jordan, okay, LeBron, okay, Kobe, and then let me pick Wilt Chamberlain. And then other people say, well, you know what? I got Oscar Robertson. He averaged a triple-double for a season. How am I going to take him out? Well, I got Magic. It's nice because it only gives you four spots, so it gives a lot of room for moving things around. And kind of, it's always hard to be, last person in, first person out. So it adds a little bit of fun in that more limited format. So this is something I think we're going to adopt it long term. And I think it'd be really funny to eventually do the Mount Rushmore of shitters episode because
I think that would be a solid choice. I
going
love
back to
that.
last episode, that's like I said, that's where I like to have fun. I think I could
Yeah.
pick out the foremost dynamite shitters, and I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Well, and
I'm down to do it.
when budgets are no option and you have unlimited resources, you can pick whatever the heck you want. But when you're confined to that small price point, things really start getting tight. Like you really had to start reevaluating what concessions you're going to make that list happen. I love that exercise.
Right, and it's hard to pick watches when they all have everything, when they all have the water resistance, when they're all chronometer spec, when they're all precious metals or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's apples to oranges at that point,
When the
or apples to
watches
apples at that
when the
point.
watches are so cheap that you have to compromise and rob Peter to pay Paul in certain areas, that's when
Exactly.
it gets fun because you have to
Yeah.
prioritize what you're looking for.
Yeah,
So
it's a real challenge. Like last week's episode when we did that, I remember this was the challenge for sure. It was difficult to do.
yes, so that might be in the pipeline eventually, but it's not tonight's episode. We kind of just went with chronographs because spontaneity is one of the finer spices of life, and we just decided that's what we're going to go with. So chronographs is our Mount Rushmore of chronographs is the topic tonight, and so I think we both have four. I also have a couple honorable mentions because there's so many good ones. It's
Yeah,
again hard to pick which four are going to make it and who's going to get left out. I have no doubts we're going to have some crossover, but I
sure.
think the beauty of this activity is you have to pick specific
Yeah.
models. So even if
Yeah.
you're going to say Speedmaster, you have to pick a Speedmaster because
Yeah.
a lot of them have a lot of different historic significance, different stories within the brand, who wore it, where it went, etc. Different looks to them. So I think that's important. So you definitely have to pick a specific watch. And at least when we do overlap, maybe you're not picking the exact same reference, which is also nice.
Yeah.
I guess we'll kick it off.
So before we do this, do
yeah.
you want to do your whole four first and then I go, or do you want to do one and one, or what's the plan here?
You know what? I think we got to go I think we got to go four each because it's
Okay.
I think it might be hard to track if you're not doing all four.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
So I'll let you roll it.
Okay, I'll go first.
I'll let you roll it.
I'll go first. Talking about chronographs, I think it's hard not to go with this one first. Not that it is, in my opinion, the best chronograph, but it might be the most talked about nowadays. I'm going Rolex Daytona.
Okay.
I, however, am going to go with one of my favorite models of Rolex Daytona. It is the Zenith Daytona.
Fair.
Okay.
Fair.
Now, I chose this one specifically, and this goes back to the 1980s when Rolex first put an automatic movement in the Daytona. So this is a big leap, which from what used to be a manual wind chronograph to an automatic chronograph. So a big leap for them. And I was kind of surprised when I originally found out about this because you think they're so ahead of the curve and they had, such an early hand in automatic movements that you'd think they would have been up on automatic chronographs. Obviously, we know about the whole automatic chronograph race, but I would have thought it would have come way before when it came for them. I mean, they're borrowing a movement in the 1980s. They're not getting their own proprietary automatic chronograph movement until later than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of surprising from a Rolex standpoint. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Zenith movement is tremendous. It's a legendary movement. But I think
legendary enough to be in a Daytona.
Right, exactly. Rolex is using it. It's a good movement, right? Other important kind of aspects of this watch also is it was the jump to 40 millimeters. And also
the original size was what, 39 or 38?
Yes. And it also boasted 100-meter water resistance.
Yeah.
Which again is for
still
some
no
people,
date.
Not for some other people. Yes, also still no date. It had a steel bezel. You could get it in precious metal, two-tone, gold. For me, the one I prefer, I don't know if everybody's cup of tea is this one. I like the black dial with the steel bezel. I think it looks really slick.
The contrast is better for sure.
I think so. Whereas obviously with the ceramic Daytona, I think the white is much more popular nowadays, but the black with the steel bezel looks A1. I think that's the one you go with.
Well, because especially too back then, there was two real black dial or white dial versions, I should say, because you had the white dial with like the silver
Yeah.
subdials, and then you had the white dial with the black subdials, which markedly looked better than the silver subdials because they're again more contrast. But I think in this variation, the black with the silver subdials really is a handsome looking watch. I'm not a Daytona fan myself. I knew you were going to pick this watch, so I did not pick it. But this is a solid choice for sure. How could you not bring up this watch?
But again, that's the beauty of this exercise is I think a lot of people they say Daytona and they're either going to go modern Panda or they're going to go Paul Newman,
Yeah,
right? Those roll off the tongue when you say Daytona.
yeah,
I specifically like this one because not only does it have some interesting history, it has one of the best chronograph movements in it, and it also is sort of a landmark model for Rolex in general. So,
yeah. It's basically a transition.
yes,
I mean, this is so weird to me because it's such an iconic Rolex design. As you mentioned, the 6239, 6238s, those Daytonas that featured, the manual winding calibers back then. When Rolex finally moves into the automatic with the 4030 caliber, this was it's a Zenith movement, it's an El Primero caliber, and for it's so funny that for a long, long, long time, as a watch collector and an enthusiast, I didn't even know this story. That Zenith was the movement that was inside the Rolexes of the 90s and the 2000s. Like that was so crazy to me. And then eventually, Rolex swaps out the movement with the 4130 caliber, which is what is in it today. But very interesting story that this is. I mean, it just testament to Zenith, right?
so this one is an actual Zaytona, where people were calling the Chronomaster Sport the Zaytona because they thought it
Yeah.
looked like one. This one is an actual Zaytona. So a
I like that. I
little
like
chunk
that.
of history there for you,
Yeah,
folks.
yeah, so cool, so cool. Very, very,
All
very
right, I'm
cool.
gonna hit my next one. This
Yeah.
one we might have the exact same watch on, and if we do, it's okay. Again, if we were gonna do NBA, we'd both have Jordan, we'd both have LeBron. So I'm gonna go with the Moonwatch, not
Okay.
just the Moonwatch, the Moonwatch. So the ST105.012. This
Ooh.
is
Okay.
this
Okay.
is the watch that went to the moon with the
Okay. I like this.
astronauts. So I think that's a slam dunk for moon watches. And again, there's a few different ways you could have gone. You could have gone with the most contemporary moon watch because of how
Yeah.
technologically advanced it is. You could have gone with an Ed White variant. Just like the Ed White, this has a 321 caliber.
Yep. Yep.
However, this was the first 42 millimeter model of the Moonwatch,
That's
which
right.
is
That's right.
quite interesting, right? Some of the other, I believe there were what 39 before that.
Yeah. It's. I think technically they were 38.7,
Okay,
but 39 millimeters. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. So these dropped in the mid 1960s, and they have all the classic looks that they put in the new one that were very desirable before they just dropped that again. The dot over
Yeah.
90, the step dial, a lot of the fonts that people look for, and again that legendary 321 that has a column wheel where if you know anything about Speedmasters, the large majority of the recent ones are cam.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that was a big deal, and the column wheel chronograph is very sought after, especially nowadays that kind of people have figured out about the whole vertical clutch and all that. And it's just a very satisfying click and all. Not that the cams are bad at all. I've owned
Mm-mm.
multiple of them and they perform beautifully. And realistically, if you didn't know any better, you probably wouldn't have
No.
any
Yeah.
knowledge of what the
This is
difference
just this is
was.
just watch nerd nonsense. But I mean, technically, column wheels from a manufacturing standpoint are more difficult to produce
I would assume.
because the cam system can literally be stamped out of metal. The column wheel actually has to be created because it's literally a three-dimensional component. There's actually columns that are coming up out of the wheel, hence the name, that have to be machined. So it's a little bit more labor intensive. It's a little bit more difficult to produce, but ultimately the end result aesthetics is nicer because it looks more beautiful. It's technologically more advanced because it's got more traditional watchmaking elements in it. And lastly, as you pointed out, I mean, the response of the initiation of the chronograph and the stopping of the chronograph and the resetting is so much more crispy and crunchy that like it's very tactile in comparison to the cam. The cam's a little bit more spongy, but you still know when you push the button. Like it's not. It's not a big deal. It just feels a little bit better with the column wheel.
Yeah, that thing clicks. It's like a snap.
Yeah,
I won't
exactly,
deny it is
exactly.
nice.
It's oh yeah, for sure. When you have them side by side and you feel them, you're like, yeah, one's real crunchy, the one's a little soft and squishy. It's okay. It's all right.
On to the next here. This is suddenly becoming a very heavy Zenith episode.
Uh-oh.
I've mentioned my adoration for this watch before. It is the El Primero A386. So the original tricolor subdial El Primero, the one that is literally El Primero, the
Yep.
first, right? The
Yep.
one that claims to be the first automatic chronograph. Again,
Yep.
whether that is or isn't true is up for debate. But 37 millimeters, you get the super cool star on the case back, ladder bracelet. You get the colors that I always rant about, the different color subdials, the red
And that
hand.
second hand, man, that second
It is elite. It's an elite second.
hand. It's elite. I love that. It is very elite.
You get the amazingly thin case for
Yeah.
such a great movement, such a great chronograph. And again, if they made a movement good enough for Rolex, so
Yeah.
it's just a dynamite piece overall. And especially these ones, if you see them now, they've aged so nicely, especially when the markers have yellowed out. The
Yeah.
dials they haven't faded, but they've matured a little bit. These look so good now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even though they remade them, I would much rather prefer an old age one. I think a lot of people would have.
Oh
But
yeah. I mean, of course. How could you not, right? Like if you had the money, all the discretionary income in the world, and you could buy an original vintage Zenith, who wouldn't want to do that?
and this watch is interesting to me because it has a 4:30 date that is very obtrusive. Like it's not smoothly put in. It cuts
No,
off a lot of things and it's kind of
it's
just
an
out there.
afterthought. Let's be honest. Like this date's an afterthought, but that's
But
also why
for
it's
some
charming.
reason it works on this
Yeah, it's
watch.
charming.
It's just tossed on there, but it works. Like I don't notice
But
it as much as everybody complains about noticing 4:30 dates and how much they hate them. It just works.
but again, for me, this kind of underscores a design aspect of this watch. It's an afterthought because the most important things were the chronograph. It was
Yeah.
the movement. It was the readout. The date was secondary. Nobody cared. It was nice that it was there. But for me, when I look at the aesthetics of this, if it was really something that was intentionally placed to be legible, it probably would have been at the 3 o'clock or the 6 o'clock. But no, they're like, okay, where can we put this in the dial that's going to be the least obtrusive, but still have a date? Okay, 4:30, smack, right? Like it's just kind of like, okay, we'll stick it there. That to me is more the designers focusing on what's actually important, which is the watch itself. The subdials, the timing, all of that stuff is more important than the date.
And this was just a time period where Zenith just absolutely crushed it
Yes,
in
yes,
the
yes.
chronograph game. Like even the old 384 Pandas, the the cover girl, if you've ever seen that one, there are so many great references. Even I think it was later on the poker chip, which is just so out there.
Yeah.
I know they recently did a
Yeah, they did
revival
a
of
reissue
a
of it,
lot of
right?
these pieces, and I know they've been super limited, which stinks because I would totally like love one of them, but they just did it right, and they just have all the good just chronograph design. I love them so much. I can't say enough about them. So we'll see if Zenith pops off this coming week or two after all this love we're giving them.
It's certainly a very interesting brand, and you have to give respect where respect is due. Again, to reiterate, I mean, this was a movement that was in a Rolex, especially their top of the line. And back then, when you could get any sports model Rolex you wanted, the only one you could not get was the Daytona. That was reserved for the most astute collectors, the people that had the highest purchase histories, things like that. That was a truly grail watch, even before the term grail watch existed, you know? So the fact that Rolex reserved that caliber for that type of watch says a lot about the specific Zenith El Primera movements that were inside those Rolexes back then. So I'll just say that. But the one thing that I find that I love about Zenith is they're a brand that's also been able to relaunch their vintage aesthetic, and it looks exactly like it did 60 years ago,
Yeah,
50 years ago.
those are faithful reeditions.
I mean, it's perfect. And the thing is, that design is quintessentially their own.
Yep.
You can't, I mean, if you put a bunch of chronographs next to each other and you're like, does this look like the same? Yes, it's a chronograph. They got 3 subdials. Okay. But the fact that they did the colors and the vibrancy of the materials that they used and the font and everything that is their own design language. And I love that. And I love that even their modern issues still carry that design language forward and pay tribute to it in a faithful way. And I think it's fantastic. This is a home run watch for sure.
Lastly, number 4, get ready. This is where I'm doing a Zagaruski.
Uh-oh.
Because I think everybody says chronograph. Bro's going to slam dunk it with a Seiko chronograph.
Yeah,
right?
it's gonna be a Pogue, right?
You're going to troll the automatic chronograph lovers from Zenith. And no, actually quite the opposite. I'm going to go with the Hoyer Carrera. I believe the reference is 2447.
You picked one of mine.
Did I? No way.
Yeah, you did. You
Okay.
did.
All right. At least, hey, if that's the first one, I'm surprised, to be honest. So, got its name from a Mexican car race, apparently.
Yep.
They started
Killed a lot of people, by the way. That
I did hear that.
was very dangerous. It was very dangerous.
So apparently, I guess Jack Hoyer got the name from some racers who were racing, and they told him about this race, and he said, Carrera sounds cool to me. I'll take it, or whatever.
Yeah,
And so they sported a Valju movement. Unlike most chronographs, they don't have an external bezel. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yes.
It's something you don't really take in when you originally look at that, because you usually think chronograph, tachymeter, external bezel, and then you look at these and you're like, oh, actually, this is a pretty plain looking watch. I mean, it has 3 subdials, but it's very, as far as chronographs go, it is not very busy.
No, but what's funny about that? Do you know who the first brand to do an external chronograph bezel was?
No.
It was Omega. Omega was the first watch company in the world to take the tachymeter scale, remove it from a dial, and put it on an external bezel. And that was the way that it was when it was launched in 1957. So literally all other chronographs that came after that with tacky bezels on the outside were borrowing the style.
Very interesting. I learned something today. Speaking of technical innovation, they improved water resistance on these models by using a metal ring around the outside of the crystal.
We read the same articles.
Cool. We probably did. I mean, I gotta assume if we did research on it, we probably looked at all the same sources.
Yeah, we did.
So that's interesting. So you're getting water resistance on a chronograph there. Big deal, because they're notably not too resistant to water.
Yes.
But yeah, this just has a super classic look. The stick indices, the Hoyer badge for me.
Oh man,
without the tag over it is super cool. Everything. The big U, right? It's just a great watch, and you see it on a lot of the vintage reseller pages, and with good reason. I mean, I think I got a free edition of Hodiki magazine for whatever reason. I don't know why, and it's on the cover. It's behind me. You can see it over there. It's a
yeah.
It's just a super cool watch, and it's got that sort of time period stamped into it. When you look at it, you could tell it's old, but it's just great. It's plain, but I think that's sort of also what makes it charming.
No, I think you actually said it right. And this was going to be the first watch that I was going to cover. So since this is your last one and my first,
that'll be a good transition.
I'll jump into this one as well, because this is one that I had on my list too. And we read a lot of the same articles, because I can tell you definitely read what I read. But I love this watch for a lot of different reasons, because I love that it's simplistic, and I think that was interesting from what was read about, or what we read about this particular watch, is Jack was really looking for something to be functional, but as austere and very modern as possible.
Yeah.
Right. Clean aesthetics, clean lines, very Eames, very 1950s, 1960s, modern aesthetic. This watch is emblematic of that. And, Valju 72 movement. So again, a very, very high grade movement. It was used by a lot of different brands, manual winding, of course, But I will have to say this: of all the variations, because the original reference of the Carrera was a 2447N.
Yep.
N was Noir, which was the black dial, and it
Black.
had the silver outside retention ring for the crystal, and that's where he put all the graduations to really clean up the dial so that you didn't have all this extra dial text or the extra dial stuff on there. But my absolute favorite variation of this, since we had to pick specific references, my version is the 2447SN, which was the silver and black Panda.
Gotta
The
agree
silver
with you.
dial, black sub dials. There's just something so stealth sexy about this watch that I don't even know how to describe it. It's like, to me, it's like if I had to ask my almost 2-year-old daughter to draw me a chronograph, this is what she would draw me. It's just so iconic in its design. It's like it's always been in the back of your mind. Like if someone was like, "Hey, draw this watch for me," this is what you would draw, because it just makes sense that that's what you would draw, and it's stunning. I absolutely love the watch. I love the sub dials. I love the integration. I love that it came on beads of rice bracelets. Like this watch is just so 60s in the best way, right? And oh, you didn't like it on the beads of rice bracelet? Well, here's a nice perforated Corfram strap that you'll wear when you're driving in your high performance race car. Just like awesome.
Yeah, they just nailed all the proportions.
Yeah.
Super legible.
And before we got started recording today, this is why I asked you that question. I was like,
I had a feeling.
I was like, why? Why is it when I look at this watch, why is this timepiece not a consistent mainstay in the Tag Heuer collection today? I'm not talking about that bloated monstrosity at 42 millimeters that you're seeing on the website, or the 44 version that is a complete bastardization of any racing legacy this watch ever had. But why is this model not there?
And somebody actually put that on the show post last week. They said, why do I have to wait for limited editions to come out to pick this watch up in small batches and compete for them when this is maybe the best watch they've ever made? I should be able to get this any day of the week.
It should be their Speedmaster. And it's not. It's not. I mean, the cherry dial one that came out last week, we talked about it on the pod, or the week before. That is one of the most beautiful Carreras I've ever seen. Personally, I love that dark red dial, because it could have been a green dial like what everyone else is doing today. But Tag's like, you know what? We're just gonna go a little bit different. We're just gonna go cherry bomb red.
Could have been an aqua dial,
you know. But I love that they went with a different color than what people would expect them to go with. And honestly, I wasn't even expecting that watch at all. So I think it was a good release for them. But again, it's, why do I have to get this in a limited edition? This watch should be a mainstay in the collection. Give me a Noir dial. Give me a silver Noir dial, and give me a Noir silver dial. Like, that's it. That should just be consistent in the collection at all times. 39 millimeters automatic, or hell, make it manual winding. I don't care. And let's roll. Tag, do yourself a solid and do it.
We got to get him on the horn to the Gaz and have him run it up the flagpole.
You know, he's too busy wearing 3-handers, man. You know, 3-handers. He should be rocking 2447 Carreras. Man.
All right. What else you got for us there, big guy?
All right. So I went intentionally as far left field as I could go with a lot of different watches, because I was like, okay, we can't talk about, vintage watches or chronographs in general. We can't, not mention a Daytona. We can't not mention an El Primero. I knew for a fact, almost in my head, that you were going to pick those two watches. So I intentionally steered away from them. I had an idea you might pick a Speedy, but I'll get to that one a little bit later. But the next watch that I wanted to pick, I wouldn't say is probably one of the most iconic chronographs ever, but for me, it's just a really awesome looking chronograph. And I had to add it in here. So for me, I added in the 1950s Brigade Type 20 chronograph. This was made for the French Air Force in the late 50s. I love it. Bicompax, one of the subdials in some variations was enlarged. It had kind of the graduations there for different timing references for the pilots. It was also one of the first flyback chronograph movements, which I think is really awesome. And I love that this is a watch that is quintessentially Breguet, which I think in many ways marries really well traditional, classic, old world watchmaking with something that's a little bit more modern. And I love this watch. My favorite modern version of it, if I could find a modern version of it, would be the one that they did a few years back for Only Watch, which was kind of like a chocolate patina version. It looks almost like the version from 1950 to a T if it had a tropical dial. And if I could get my hands on it, that would be the one. But there's only one in existence because it was made for that charity auction.
Yep.
But the Type 20, I think, is a really cool chronograph because it has a military history. It has a very elegant style about it, which is so weird, with this kind of like engine knurling on the outside of the bezel that rotates, and it's just a funky watch, and I absolutely love it for that very specific reason. So the Type 20 for me, an original one, would be certainly a go-to. My next one, I mean, how could you have a legendary chronograph conversation and not include a Breitling, specifically a Navitimer? But I wasn't about to pick your run-of-the-mill Navitimer, so I went with the 24-hour Cosmonaut, specifically
Very
the
nice.
version, the 809, that was worn by Scott Carpenter, the second American astronaut into space with the Mercury project on board his mission Aurora 7. He wore the 24-hour Cosmonaut to time his orbital flight, which is pretty cool. He wasn't there long enough to really need a 24-hour watch, which is kind of a hilarious aspect of his flight story, but certainly a very cool watch in the first place because it was one of the first Swiss watches in the world to go up into space. And it's cool. If you're going to talk about quintessential chronograph, you have to have an Navitimer in the conversation. But for me, the 809 Cosmonaut with the 24-hour dial, it's just a very interesting watch. They just relaunched it, as we know. There was the whole hype around that watch, which when I look at the press videos and everything about this particular release, I was so saddened because upon like Scott Carpenter's like re-entrance into Earth, like his watch got wet during the mission in the splashdown, and then he just left it in the sock drawer for like 40 years. And you haven't seen these photos?
No.
Oh my god, it's so bad.
It's toast.
Bro, it doesn't even look like a dial was ever even there.
Jeez.
The entire watch has been completely rusted inside and out. Like it literally looked like it lived at the bottom of the sea for like 20 years. So it's so funny that like Scott Carpenter's watch finally resurfaces, and I was like, wait, that's it? But nevertheless, the story is still kind of hilarious. But it's just a cool watch. All water ingress aside, it's a cool watch, and I think it's certainly one that has a historical value, and certainly one that's very cool to have in a collection of hallmark quintessential chronographs, which is very cool.
Yeah, and I certainly had this on my list of honorable mentions. My favorite part about this watch is that obviously a Navitimer is super busy. The only text it has is Navitimer.
Yeah.
It has Swiss made woven in there on the bottom, but in the main focal point of the watch, Navitimer. That's it.
Navitimer. Yep, that's it.
It's got the old logo, which is awesome.
Yeah, the OPA logo.
Yeah, you get tons of contrast with the subdials and the outer chapter rings and everything. I think everybody who sees this watch likes it. Even when I was a total noob, I saw it and I was very overwhelmed by what I was looking at, but I said,
yeah,
that's cool. I know that's a cool watch. I can tell.
Yeah, it's certainly a cool watch. And it's funny, one of these 809 Navitimers was actually worn in the Bond film Thunderball. Maybe not the 24-hour version, but one of the pilots, like it's like his plane hijacked and the nuclear warheads removed from it. He actually dies wearing his 809.
So it's not the part where they're underwater.
Yeah, it's one of the parts where he's underwater.
Oh,
yeah. He's like wearing the Navitimer underwater, and he's like dead.
Eat it, Carpenter.
Yeah. I mean, hey, apparently they're not not doing so well in the water. Did you find a photo of that watch I was talking
I
about?
did. It's pretty beat up.
So it's awesome that he had it for like the mission and he like splashed down in it and all this stuff. But the fact that this poor movement and dial are just absolutely wrecked is kind of a funny story. So, but I will say this: I'm glad the new version did go back to a manual wind. I think that's pretty cool.
It looks like a penny. It's so
Yeah,
rusty.
yeah, like what you found in the fountain after like 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Wow.
But you know, you live and you learn, and then you get a watch with water resistance. So there you go. And speaking of watches with water resistance that could handle splashdowns, I'm gonna have to go with my last pick, which for me is probably one of the most important chronographs in the world. You already mentioned a version of it with the speedy, and this is certainly a speedy as well. But I didn't go with the reference that you went with. I intentionally went with the ST 105003, not the 012.
Okay.
And for me, the reason why is this. This was the off-the-shelf chronograph that Omega unknowingly submitted to NASA for the space program testing. NASA requested the watches in 1964. Omega sent them in, had no idea why they were sending them in. And again, they were sent in along other brands. So there was, three other brands that submitted watches, Rolex being one of them. Nobody really understood why they were submitting watches. Could have an idea, but nobody knew. And this watch just being so well over-engineered, so well built, was able to pass all of NASA certification tests to flight qualify this watch for use in space, officially in March 1st of 1965. The SD 105003, what collectors call the Ed White,
Yep.
is one of the most historically important chronographs in the world, specifically because it passed NASA's test for flight qualification, but also was the first ever watch to do EVA. So this was the Ed White watch because Ed White was the first American astronaut to leave a space capsule. And that was on Gemini 4. And so not only was the watch certified, but when Ed White's launch with Ed White's EVA, it became officially a professional timepiece because now it was used in the vacuum of space.
Very interesting.
No watch had really ever been subjected to that before. So for me, it's an incredibly important reference for the Speedmaster. It was a transitional one as well, because when you look at the aesthetics of the watch, it has the case from the previous generation, the CK2998s, those smaller cases, right? That 38.7 millimeter. But you look at the dial, and it has what's essentially the dial right before the professional designation is added. You have the baton hands, you have the arrow tip on the chronoseconds, like all of the things that look like a modern Speedmaster today is already prevalent on this particular variation. It just doesn't have the asymmetrical case, and it just doesn't have the professional writing on the dial. But this was the watch that got Omega to add professional to the dial because it flew in space.
And it's so tough, especially when you're doing an exercise like this, because how many Speedmasters, first of all, are there? Tons.
Tons.
And you can go on and on with different variations: Tintin, Japan Racing, Snoopy, Snoopy, Snoopy. Um,
There's only three. Okay.
but I'm just saying, you have so many different dials, so many different variations from such a historic watch that you really can pick any of them and wind up okay. And for the most part, I'm just talking about manual winds. I mean, you have automatics, you have triple dates. We've spoken about so many of them at length. It's almost like you have unlimited options in that regard, and I think that's great as far as being a collector goes. But it makes these exercises mighty tough.
No, it does. It does, and that's when you were reading out the first parts of the speedy reference you picked, and I was like ST 105. I was like,
no.
oh no. And then you're like 012. I was like, yes, okay, all right. At least I had something to talk about because you went with the professional.
Yes.
You went with the Moonwatch. What's funny though is a lot of people don't know this, and I only know this because I love space and NASA and all things related to that. The ST-105003 was actually the last Speedmaster to walk on the moon.
Hmm.
So Gene Cernan, when he became the last man to step foot on the lunar surface with Apollo 17, he didn't wear a 102. He wore a 003. So these watches were the first batch of watches that NASA certified for space flight. And then eventually Omega switched the cases to the asymmetrical cases because they were going to do that naturally anyway. And it just made more sense because the pushers and the crowns were protected from, impact and catching on things. It was easier for the NASA astronauts to use them. And because it was a bigger case, it was easier to operate, right? But NASA, being a government agency, didn't get rid of anything. So these watches would take their turns going through the different missions after the flight qualification. So it's so fortuitous that the first watch that was actually certified for flight was also the very same watch that would be the last one to step foot on the lunar surface.
Seems very appropriate.
Which I think is so cool. And that's a watch that is in, I believe, in the Smithsonian, or it's in the property of Omega at their museum. But that watch was the same version that they used to create a digital scan to recreate the new 321 versions in stainless steel, the modern versions. They couldn't open up the watches because it was considered a historical artifact.
Yeah.
So they had to use like a high version of MRI scanning to literally scan the watch inside and out to recreate the movement and the case and brace and everything to the exact specifications of the original.
How does that work with magnetism and watch parts?
I don't know. I really don't have an answer for it, but apparently it was a process called.
When I hear MRI, that's the first thing I think of.
Apparently, it's a process called tomography MRI scanning. I don't know what the difference is.
It could be some sort of an ultrasound or something.
Yeah,
there's so much technology out there.
I think it's
anything's
more so
possible.
Like that. I think it's more so like that. Yeah, but they were able to recreate it to the exact specifications. So these modern, Ed White, 321 steel Speedmasters that are extremely coveted, and very hard to get. It's essentially a vintage one, but with like a modern bracelet.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome. So Robert Jan, if you're listening to this, I hope one day you and I will meet because I'd love to try on your 321.
All right. I guess since we got that out of the way, should we roll honorable mentions?
Yeah, let's do some honorable mentions for sure.
A lot of them kind of jive with ones that we picked. I know you picked the Navitimer. I also really love the Top Time.
That's a great pick.
The old Top Time.
Yeah, that's a good looking watch.
Yeah, and
it almost looks like a Carrera.
I was gonna say it looks a lot like a Carrera, and you know what? You can get into those for a lot less than a Carrera nowadays. Yeah. So that's nice. Also speaking tag, or should I say Hoyer, the Monaco.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. It's got a cool, it's a square watch. It's a cool square chronograph.
Hey, the world's first water resistant square chronograph.
Yeah. And it's got a sexy name, right? Monaco. I spoke a lot, I think last episode before, about the Spitfire from IWC. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
not for any particular reason other than it's just a pretty sleek pilot chrono.
Yeah.
Obviously, I got to pay a little love to the 6139s, the Bruce Lees, the Pogues.
Yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them, even though I didn't pick one, and I know people are probably disappointed in me.
No, but sometimes, like you said, we get a zig when people expect us to zag. It's kind of like, I intentionally did not pick the Monaco because I thought you would pick it.
And so I did not pick my last honorable mention because I thought you were going to pick it, and that is the Tudor Big Block.
You thought I would pick that?
Yeah. I thought that was a sneaky pick. The Tudor
that's a very sneaky pick, by the way. But I didn't even think about it. I thought about everything else that we've talked about today. Like literally every single other watch. I thought about the Top Time. I was like, I don't know. Is it too on the nose, or is it too off the beaten path? I don't know. I thought for sure you were gonna pick a Pogue. Like legitimately. I was like, yeah, he's probably gonna pick a Pogue or a Bruce Lee or something. Like, bro cannot resist.
That's right.
Here I am eating crow, right? Because you certainly did the opposite of that. But yeah, no, big block.
Big block. You get a hey, it's you get sort of the Daytona vibe, but you get a date with a Cyclops,
Yeah.
right? And again, it's also another outsourced movement, which makes it a little bit of a chonky boy. But these
I
just
mean,
have
that's okay.
so much personality. I really wish they'd bring this watch back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool watch. It certainly is. But again, for me, some honorable mentions. I had Monaco on my list. If we were going Tudor, for me, if I was going to go anything, it would be the old Monte Carlo.
Yeah, the Heritage Chronos are so
Heritage Chronos,
good.
Monte Carlo, the home plate dial, like those would be my
That color scheme
Tudor
is
Chronos.
so
Yeah,
good.
it is. It is. I mean, both of them, orange, white, and black, or blue,
Yeah.
white, and orange. I mean, there was just something so awesome and funky about the 60s and 70s when it came to watch design that I absolutely love. I mean, you think about things like the Top Time, the Zorros, like the original Zorros, like
Yep.
so awesome that somebody came up with this. Is like, yes, that's the dial I want to see on this production watch. Like, it's just like today we would be like, this is dumb. Why would you ever do that? But someone's like, no, this is the straight fire, and we're gonna put it on. I mean, this is the time that we saw things like the Ultraman from Omega come out.
I love the Ultraman.
I,
Forgot
I
him
mean,
when I was talking about Speedmasters.
I mean, how could you not love the Ultraman? You know, and for a long time, collectors didn't even know if it was legitimate. They didn't even know if that was a real watch. And it wasn't until some deep diving at Omega HQ that it finally came out, probably 5 years ago or so, that this was actually a legitimate watch. Because for many years, people thought that the second hand was just modified from like a Mark II,
Yeah.
because there was a few that had the orange second hand. But the Ultraman, come to find out, actually has a slightly longer second hand because the dial aperture is slightly longer on the regular speedies than it is on the Mark IIs. So it was a decidedly, unique choice that Omega had as an option for people back in the 1960s. I'm like, can I get a new Speedmaster with an orange second hand, please? That would be fantastic. Okay, thank you. Bye. Um, I mean, just cool stuff like that. You see that on Top Time. You see it on a lot of different stuff back then. But that era, those 2 decades of design were just so impressive to me because it literally laid the foundation for essentially every cool thing that we try to covet today.
Yeah.
You know,
And the Monte Carlo even has a 6 o'clock Cyclops on some of them, and I don't hate
no,
it.
no. I mean, could you imagine if Seiko did a modern reissue of a Pogue?
Well,
That
that's
would
the
be
other part
sick.
is we talked about faithful reeditions. They just made some new speed timers that really don't resemble the old speed timers
No,
very much at all.
no.
But if they reissued the Pogue, I mean, that's like the watches I always joke about that these companies keep in the vault that are like when we
There's already a prototype of it
if
somewhere,
we
and they're
fall on
just
hard
waiting.
times, we got this.
Yeah, yeah. They got that one in the pipeline. I mean, look, hell, they've reissued everything else they've done. Like the last real big thing is to create a new modern Pogue. I think that would be so sick
Yeah.
because, again, you think about watch design. How many yellow dial, red and blue bezels chronographs do you know about in a barrel shaped case? Like that is its complete own design. Nothing else looks like it.
It's like the El Primero. It's got a lot of stuff going on, but it works.
It's a hideous watch to me, but it's so ugly. I love it, and I think that that's part of the charm. Plus, it flew in space, so you also can't take that away from it too. I
And
think it
it
was the
might have
first.
won the automatic chronograph race. So
Yeah, yeah. There's also
the
that.
movement, at least.
Yeah, there's also that. No, I think, man, I had to say when you were bringing this to my attention at first, I was like, I don't really understand what the topic is, but once I figured it out, I was like, this is going to be a very fun exercise
Yeah, and it's one
because
we can bring back. So that's great.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could do this for any type of genre that we want, and maybe the next thing is to challenge the boys to see if they can replicate it. I mean, it might be a little hard now because we've already picked some incredible bangers, but you know, it's always interesting to see what other people come up because when you are presented with constraints like that, um, it makes things difficult. It makes things very hard to pick. And everyone's got their opinions on stuff. So
Yeah, it's always interesting to see where people split the hairs, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah, exactly.
So, other than that, you got anything else there, big guy?
No, man. I think that that's it. This was a little bit more of a challenging exercise than I thought, but it was fun. I was excited to see what you picked, and obviously, we had some similarities and things that we like and that we would pick for ourselves. But happy to have done another episode. We're moving on very quickly. We'll be approaching episode 52, not too far off into the future, which is going to be pretty
Yeah, this was
impressive.
42 in case you were counting.
42, yeah. So we got another 10 episodes before we hit the solid
The one
old
year
1 year
mark.
mark. Yeah. So
We
it's gonna
actually
be
have
crazy.
a few milestones coming up. We're chasing 50,000 downloads soon. And your boy will be chasing 30,000 follows soon. So, some things to keep an eye out for, some celebrations that'll be in order.
Yes, yes. And have you decided when officially you're doing the giveaway? Do
It's
we
gonna
have
be
a
it's gonna be October. That's the
okay?
that's the month of breast cancer awareness. So that'll be it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So stick around, guys, too, for October, because as we mentioned, we'll be doing the timepiece. We have some other goodies that we have in the pipeline as well for some runner up winners that we'll be doing. So we'll give you guys some more information about that as we get closer to time, which would be fantastic. But for those of you that have already donated money and things like that to Bro's cause, this is really his project. I'm just kind of along for the ride. But for those of you who have done that already so far this year, thank you. It's really impressive to see how much the community has responded. Um, it's really great that we do this as a podcast. It's very, very important. It helps to really benefit a lot of people that we don't know directly. So we're very fortunate that we can give back. So we should. Anything else you want to add on that, bro? With regards to the project?
No, just really appreciate all the love and support on that, and really enjoying all the pink strap wristies and the creative shots I've
Yes,
seen.
yes,
There's been a ton of them. It's been a lot of fun. So
yeah, for sure.
I tried to share as many as I could, and just yeah, thanks for the support. It's got a lot of really positive reception from a lot of different people, and it's great to see.
Any update from our boy Strap Habit on when the next drop is going to be?
He said it would be later this month originally. The supply
Okay.
chain's getting real weird. I don't know if it's going to be. I'll have to do a little digging on that. But hopefully we'll restock at the end of this month. Everybody else can get the ones they were looking for.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, hey guys, thanks again. This is your place for horological hot takes, taboo topics, and often unpopular watch opinions. Again, as always, I'm Schmitty. I'm with my good boy, Bro Dinky, and thanks for tuning in. See you on the next one.
Deuces.